So I wanted to thank Rusty Tweed and Coconino Community College for inviting us to give this presentation at the Comet Talk. There's a bunch of technology here. And so we do our almighty puja to the electron and hope it all works. When we press buttons, we like to see things happen, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Hazel Clark is sitting in the corner, and she is the principal owner of Vishnu Temple Press, who put together the book on Navajo Bridge with Jerry Cannon. Some of those books are here tonight. This is the Navajo Bridge that Jerry did. Excuse me, as I choke. I'm getting over a cold, and so I'll do the best I can. John Riffey, The Last of the Old Time Rangers by Gene Luttrell. Riffey was a ranger way out in western Grand Canyon for decades. Kern Nuttall's In a Better Place, Cemeteries and Grave Sites of Grand Canyon, a cheery book with some amazing history in it. Otis Marston's From Powell to Power, the first 100 river runners through Grand Canyon. The Last Homesteader on the Arizona Strip is about Al Craig, also by Gene Luttrell. Chuck Luttrell, Gene's son, wrote Craftsman Work Here, a book about National Park Service maintenance people. You typically don't hear about the maintenance people that do amazing work for the Park Service. Bobby Brighty and the Wiley Way by Martha Kruger is the true story of her family, who were on the north rim of the Grand Canyon in the early part of the last century and ran into this cute little burro. Why We Boat, compendium of stories about river running on foot, Grand Canyon backpacking stories. And then John Fuller's The Gila River Elegy and the Verde River Elegy. Those books are here tonight on sale as a fundraiser for Northland Hospice. Amazing work that they do at end of life. So thanks again to Rusty, and let's proceed with this comment talk. I want to start by thanking a whole bunch of people. If you put together a book on history, you're going to be traveling the country, looking at archives all over the place and meeting a bunch of amazing people who are really have the keys to these stories, but they're scattered all over and they haven't connected to each other. I'm not going to read them, but they're here, and this talk is being recorded, so you can go back and look that up later. The Colorado River in the southwestern part of the United States is one of the driest rivers on the planet. And yet it serves well over 40 million people with their drinking water. It's a very precious resource. We as a peoples have been wandering across this river and its landscape for many thousands of years. And it's pretty easy to get around that country if you don't have a horse and a wagon. So in the 1500s, the horses showed up after being vacant for a while. They were here in the Pleistocene. And when Europeans showed up, they brought wagons. Now, to get a horse in a wagon through this river landscape suddenly becomes terrifyingly difficult. Gold is discovered in California. Woo, 1849. Most of the East Coast decided to go to the West Coast. That's pretty nice, with their horses and wagons. You guessed it. To get across the Colorado River, they needed ferry boats. Here's this amazing picture of Yuma in the 1850s. It was a big deal to go down and watch the operation of the ferry boat in 1850. What else did you do in Yuma? I don't know. Well, what's interesting is to see all the different ferries that were set up in the 1870s to cross this barrier to transportation. And the third from the top is Lee's Ferry, which opened for business, booming business, in 1872. I think only one trip went across the river that year, I'm not sure. Well, technology. This is a story about technology and changes of technology from horse and wagon. We went to the train in just 30 years, 20 years, really fast. Well, look at all those train tracks everywhere. And then there's northern Arizona and southern Utah. There's not a single train track in there. But there was a survey to put a train right across where the Navajo Bridge is today. And that was in 1890. How about that? In 1900, there were only 2 bridges for trains crossing the Colorado River. One up in Green River, Utah, way up there, and the other way downstream, down near Needles. I really love this picture, 1892, courtesy of the Buffalo Bills Center of the West, because it shows the Lee's Ferry when it wasn't connected to a cable. Now, the ferrymen, the people that ran this boat across the river, had to know the river currents very well because they were rowing this thing with horses and wagons and people on it. And they would have to row it across the river well enough so it didn't get swept downstream with passengers and everything else. Just an amazing craft, an amazing skill. The first cable across the river happened in 1899. And that was really helpful because then the ferry boat operator didn't have to worry too much.
That was when you talked.
Just a little less work. It's kind of like running a sailboat that's tied to shore on both ends. So you just work the sail and the wind will blow you across. Well, in this case, it's the current of the river. The ferry itself is the sail and the water moves the ferry across. Pretty easy, except that the cable needs to be anchored to rock. And there's not really good rock on either side. So occasionally that cable up there would rip out and then all bets are off. And the ferry was known for its deadly activity when that happened. Okay, this is a presentation on technology and the loads were getting heavier. The loads were getting so heavy that the roads were collapsing under the loads. Amazing kind of stuff. And then they had to get this stuff on the ferry and get it across the ferry. That's all the little ferry could do to survive this kind of stuff. And then along came technology. It's called an automobile. And the first one showed up in 1909 here in this little town of Flagstaff, Arizona. Scared the kids and the horses terribly. And they drove this Kissel car up to Lee's Ferry and back. It was the first time that happened. Well, the Kissel car was like, I can't take this road, and broke down. What do you do when your car breaks down? You call a tow truck, and that's what they did. 1909 tow truck right there, and you can see the tower at the courthouse there here in Flagstaff on the right there. Got the thing back into town, loaded it back on the train. Well, they got it in the first place, they sent it back. And, yeah, well, that's the story of the Kissel car, but the cars kept coming. And Arizona was changing and people were realizing, you know, we can see this coming. We need to think about a bridge. And the first bridge champion was a woman named Charlotte Hall, the first territorial historian. She and Al Doyle out on the Arizona Strip, she's like, oh, this is incredible country out here. We need a bridge at Marble Canyon. Okay, that's pretty cool. That's 1911. It took a while for the men, my side of the gender line. We're not known for what's up here, not like Charlotte over there. Took us a while to figure out maybe we need a bridge. And one of the pushers for that was Horace Albright on the left and Grand Canyon Superintendent Minor Tillotson on the right. After 1919, the Park Service is pushing a new park called Zion, a new park called Grand Canyon. They want to bring people in these automobiles. Now that means they need roads, and to connect the Arizona Strip and Zion with Grand Canyon, they need a bridge across the river. So the Park Service was a big pusher of this. The guy on the left is called the Walrus. That's Arizona's Governor Husky Hunt. The guy on the right is our new congressional representative to Congress, new in 1923. His name's Carl Hayden. They need money to build a bridge. Hayden realizes that the Navajo Nation has a royalty fund with $100,000 in it. He's like, well, the Navajo need a bridge. And so he just by congressional fiat pulls $100,000 out of the Navajo Nation royalty fund. And the Navajo are like, we need like healthcare and food and water. We don't need a bridge. So Henry Chi Dodge, the first chairman of the Navajo Nation, goes to DC to fight the steal. And they fail. So with that and the money on hand, the state of Arizona bridge engineer Ralph Hoffman is assigned the job of designing the first Navajo Bridge by the Arizona Highway Department. That's today's Arizona Department of Transportation. Now, Hoffman's a pretty brilliant bridge engineer. Hoffman has done away with bridges that have big towers and cables and stuff overhead. He gets away with all that. He wants you, as you're driving along, to go, I'm terribly afraid of heights, because there's nothing overhead, and the guardrails on either side of the bridge have lots of big holes in them for you to look through and see what's like down there. Oh, stay on the road. That's the brilliancy of Hoffman. And when he did this, he realized you could save a substantial savings in material if you built bridges that were all underneath the roadway. Now, this arch design of a steel truss bridge was not Hoffman's unique creation to bridge engineering. This was a commonly known bridge technique. And of course, you've all been to Victoria Falls over the Zambezi, because that's where you will have seen the Navajo Bridge. You'll go, oh, I know that bridge. That's the Navajo Bridge. Well, in 1905, this is the kind of bridge that they built. And you can see there's a net down there. They were smart in 1905, and they had lost that by 1927, 28 when they did the Navajo Bridge, but I'll get into that in a little bit. Look at that. It's the Navajo Bridge right there at Victoria Falls. That bridge was built to carry a train and 2 lanes of traffic in 1905. So they can be big and strong. So Hoffman already had that technology. He knew it was cheap. Now let's talk roads. In 1925, you could get from Flagstaff to Cameron to the South Rim and back to Flagstaff, just like you can today. And the road was dirt, but it was pretty good. Now, if you wanted to go from Cameron north to that rickety little wooden ferry and cross the river and then head on up to Kanab and off into Utah, good luck. That road was way worse. And who was worried about that? Kansas City Structural Steel was terrified. They got the job to build the bridge. They didn't have any problems with the bridge and the steel erection. They don't know how to do all that. But they were like, how do we get this bridge from the railhead in Flagstaff up to the job site? That's where the problem is. Well, let me introduce you to Al Meyer Sr. He's the guy on the left. He is the head engineer for Kansas City Structural Steel. And here he is on the Dugway going down to Lee's Ferry. And he is terrified. On this trip, he runs into this guy. This is the best picture. It's the best picture I have of Eldridge Moores. Moores was a pretty interesting guy. He was in the Spanish-American War. He got into trucking. And he got into these crazy trucks and moving heavy mining equipment. And when he saw in the newspaper all this talk about this bridge, he's a smart guy. He's like, they're going to need to truck that stuff from the railroad up to the bridge site. I can get that bid. And he did $58,000 in 1927. That's $1 million today to get steel from Flagstaff up to Marble Canyon. You're like, oh, I want that job. $1 million. Yeah, it'll be easy. Huh. Well, it wasn't easy for Eldridge. One of the things he had to do was build the road. So he and his daughters were out there walking, and he's got his Brunton, and he's pounding in stakes in the ground. And he's hired the McCormick family here in Flagstaff to get out there with a horse-driven grader to grade a road for his trucks. Moores also knew that the Fayjol was coming out with a 1066 10-ton motor Colossus. This is in 1927. This is a state-of-the-art truck. It looks like today's semi-tractor trailer, doesn't it? Huh. Tandem rear wheel axle, air brakes, bunch of gears and a big transmission. Huh. Guess what? This is technology rolling along. And so he runs out and buys a couple of these things brand new. His daughter and drives him back from San Francisco on a story about that. It's in the book. You can read all about it. But it's a long way from Flagstaff out to the job site on these terrible dirt roads. So what he does is he sets up a halfway camp called Camp Moenkopi. So here's how it goes. A truck pulls into Camp Moenkopi and this terrified driver stumbles out of the truck and goes to get something to eat and then goes to bed. And a fresh driver hops in the truck and takes off and drives out and unloads the steel and comes back 12 hours later and stumbles out of the truck terrified and gets something to eat and goes to bed. And the next driver's like feeling good again. He gets in the truck and drives over to Flagstaff to pick up the steel. And those trucks nonstop ran back and forth while that kitchen at Camp Moenkopi was operating 24 hours a day. This is Eldridge Morse, brilliant guy, on schedule, delivered all the steel. That's the story of how the bridge got from Flagstaff to the river. Now, what happened at the river? Kansas City Structural Steel ironworkers arrived in March 1928. These guys are in their mid-30s, mid-40s. They're ironworkers. They get paid pretty good. Most of them didn't make it through high school. Almost all of them are white. The concept with this type of build is you want big, strong anchors in the rock. You start building a diving board out over the river and you anchor it to the rock. When that's done, you set up these cables and you sling all the steel from the end of the diving board to the other side of the river. And then you build back and you connect in the middle. It's a simple concept. I'm not going to tell you much more about how to build this bridge. I'm going to show you a 10-minute film from 1928. I get to shut up for 10 minutes. This is great. And this film is going to show you how the bridge was built. Thanks to the Myers family, Al Myers family, we have this film. It's not the best. There are factual errors in it you may pick up. And it's been from 16 millimeter to beta tape to the almighty electron. Here we go.
Here in northern Arizona, for hundreds of miles surrounding the bridge site at Marble Canyon, the country is rugged and mountainous. Trails lead to many historic places, large petrified forests, balanced rocks, and hogans of the Navajo Indians. Marble Canyon, cutting the country in half, derives its name from the fine-grade marble of its walls, 600 feet apart at the top and reaching down 500 feet to the Colorado River below. Here, a deck arch type of bridge was considered most economical. Many obstacles had to be overcome in delivering materials to this site. Steel was delivered to the railhead at Flagstaff, and special trucks were required to transport to the bridge site 140 miles away. It was thought possible to transport lighter members across the canyon by smaller trucks, and an attempt was made to do so. Here we see how light beams, made as short as possible, were lashed to the side of this small truck, and the trial haul was started over the Marvin Dugway, a narrow one-way mountain road. The trail, as you can see, was very rough and crooked, with steep grades, deep gullies, and no bridges. This long, winding, tortuous road led down to the bank of the Colorado River. Crossing the river at Lee's Ferry, however, proved impractical. A few days after this scene was taken, the ferry was wrecked, and this method of transporting the smaller steel members had to be abandoned. "75 miles of new roads had to be built to accommodate these special trucks. In making the 140-mile haul from Flagstaff to the bridge site, the trucks traveled almost continuously day and night. It required 29 hours to make the round trip. Steel comes to the job ready for construction. Every member is a unit with a definite position in the structure and can be placed without delay. With foundations completed, the work of erecting begins. As we watch the sure-footed workers tackle their jobs, the compactness of structural steel becomes apparent. Thousands of rivet holes match corresponding holes in adjoining parts with such precision that rivets are inserted without any further preparation. Stresses have been computed exactly, even to the stress in each individual rivet. Steel members are clearly marked for their place on the job, are identified and sorted for the erecting crews. In order to control the fitting of the center hinge pin of the arch, large diamond-shaped jacks or toggles are introduced at each end of the bridge. These jacks have a capacity of 700 tons each and will be operated when the center pin is placed. Stationary engines that will operate these jacks now supply power for the booms on the Traveler. The steel is rolled out on dolly and is swung by the booms out over the canyon. With the lower cords projecting out into space, sections begin to take form. As steel follows steel with clock-like precision, we get a new understanding of the steel worker and the material that he handles. To the lay mind, it seems like putting together a giant puzzle, but it is not a puzzle to the steel fabricator or engineer. Nor is there any puzzle in the steel itself. Every process in making steel, from its refinement to the final passing through the rolls, is supervised and safeguarded to maintain uniform quality. The erection of the steel frame proceeds more rapidly than any other type of fire-resisting construction. Cold weather will not delay it, and the hottest summer temperature will not affect it. Regardless of weather conditions, steel construction proceeds from the Arctic to the equator. Progress in erection is marked by the advance of the Traveler. The Traveler works by setting the farthest filling-in pieces in a panel first. Building nearer itself until the last piece is set, it is then moved forward. Unmindful of the ever-present danger that lurks in a misstep when aloft, the steel worker depends upon his sense of balance as he goes about his job, giving little thought to great height or the river below. He takes it all in his stride. Exposure to the brilliant Arizona sunshine made the task of the steel erector something to write home about. We know of men bundling up for protection against extreme cold, but here's one for Ripley. During summer, these men actually had to don heavy underwear, thick gloves, and stout shoes to protect them from sunburn and the heat of steel. Here we have an example of temperature high enough to scorch the human foot through the leather sole of an ordinary shoe, with the work of erection proceeding uninterrupted and the efficiency of the material unaltered, proving that it is practical to build anywhere, anytime with steel. Riveting crews follow closely in the wake of pinning and bolting, with perfect timing between the red-hot rivet tossed and the riveter's bucket. As the steel of the structure projects farther out into the space of upper air, the loads on the steel anchors become greater and greater. With the erection of the first half of the arch completed, the Traveler is dismantled preparatory to its transportation and erection on the opposite side. While this work was going on, a man out on the Traveler boom was able to throw a bolt attached to 300 feet of stout cord across to the other side. To this was attached a wire, and to the wire a cable. And by this simple method, transportation for men and materials across the canyon was established. In erecting the first half of the arch, all materials and supplies were transferred from the storage yard to the erectors by dolly. In erecting the second half, all men, materials, and necessities had to be transported by cableway. Greatest of all necessities in this land of golden sunshine is water, and plenty of it, as the size of this drinking water container attests. Keeping the cableway lubricated combines the talents of the steel worker and the circus acrobat. We have seen these steel members transported over rough mountain roads, and now we see them carried over a great natural barrier. They require no freighting or special carriage. Construction being dependent upon the Traveler, no time is lost in its reassembly and erection. From across the deep gorge now comes the great shoe, and the work of erecting the second half of the arch gets underway. Here we see the steel anchors and how they are secured in rock tunnels, 125 feet long, with each anchor capable of holding 1,000 tons. The sun shining on one side of the bridge in the morning and the other side in the afternoon subjected not only the men to extreme heat, but the steel as well. Structural steel maintains its strength to a remarkable degree in the presence of atmospheric heat. Investigations have shown that it actually increases in compressive strength with a rise in temperature. Careful calculations are made throughout the entire construction of the bridge. Over 30 triangulation readings were taken in order to determine the exact location of the shoes. Temperature expansion of the anchor steel lowered the location of the center pin 3.5 inches daily, and the effects of the sun's rays would move it up or downstream as much as 3 inches. These changes were carefully taken into account, especially so when preparing to place the center hinge pin. The toggles controlling the center hinge of the arch are now operated while the pin is put in place. One must be impressed by the comparatively small number of men who, with simple machinery, have handled and erected the many steel members that form the bridge. The Navajo Indians paid for these high, closely latticed railings we see being erected as a protection for their herds of sheep and goats in crossing. The length of the arch span is 608 feet. The total length of the bridge with approaches is 832 feet, with the bridge floor 500 feet above the water. Thus, in spanning the Colorado River at Marble Canyon, steel has made another contribution to the advancement of civilization.
How many of you have never seen that film before? Never. Yeah. So most of the hands went up. That's an amazing film. And I want to mention Eldridge Moore, the guy who he and his family trucked all the steel out. When they did the center pinning and brought the two halves together, Moore's family was right out there watching what they were doing. Well, it's just kind of interesting. It became sort of this Arizona thing. We don't really know a lot about the crew who built the bridge. The guy on the far left, standing on the left, well, that's Al Myers. You can recognize him. He's that engineer guy. The fourth guy in, not the third guy sheltering his head from the sun, but the guy just to the right of him, that's Joe Gordon. And that's Joe outstanding in his field. Next time you go to the Navajo Bridge, just look at the railing. He's standing on this railing and then look over and say, well, that's what's behind him is this big drop. Yeah, just amazing group of people we know a little about. Wait a minute, don't go that way. I'm going to go this way. But it wasn't all fun and games for these guys. June 12th, 1928, the film didn't mention the iron worker Laith McDaniel. This bridge is just about, it's the first half coming out, and it's got one more panel to be complete. And there's a couple different stories about what happened to Laith that got him into the air, but once he was into the air, his crew watched him go for 5 seconds till he hit the river below and was never seen again. Wrong button, going the wrong way. So there is this now plaque commemorating his loss here, and it is right at the entrance to the west side of the first Navajo Bridge. These guys would have known him well. This is an amazing picture from the Al Myers family collection. Just typical iron workers on their Sunday off in the shade down by the Colorado River, doing what they do. September 12th, 1928. There's a hinge pin there. The thing is about this round, and it's only about that long. And there are 2 of them, one on the downstream side and one on the upstream side. The bridge and roadway cost just over $400,000 with completion in 1929. Actually, January 29, they opened the road up to transportation. The first documented wedding on the bridge happened very soon after that in April. The guy getting married here works for the Arizona Highway Department. He thought, and his bride thought, well, this would be cool. Let's get married on the bridge. Well, back in the day when this kind of stuff happened in the 20s, you'd be careful. So as soon as the minister said, I now pronounce you man and wife, she was abducted by some of the invited guests who happened to be Arizona Highway Department, like road builders. And they threw in a car and drove her back toward Flagstaff while they grabbed this poor guy and handcuffed him and dragged him off to Buck Lowry's hotel. Anyway, it all ended up just fine, but one of those things. You got to read the book about it. This dedication was a 2-day event. One airplane flew under the bridge, and all the people were like, off it went. 4 governors and 6,000 to 8,000 people. It was an amazing 6,000 to 8,000. You watch the newsreels, the Fox Movie Tone and Pathé Bray films of this gig. There are cars everywhere. I mean, there were at night, there were lights, people's campfires, both sides of the river. It was a big, big deal. So the little bridge that could did. And when it was built, people laughed at it because it was a wagon bridge out in the middle of nowhere. Park Service didn't laugh at it because they knew, and the tourism followed. Lots of controversy about the naming of the bridge. I won't get into that, but just know it was there. And of course, as the 20s turned into the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, traffic increased, weights went up, but a bunch of really interesting stuff happened as well. The Arizona Highway Department realized that the bridge itself could handle the increase in traffic and the heavier transportation in vehicles, but the approach roadways were going to collapse. So they got in there and put in a whole bunch of more steel. And there was a bunch of legislation that happened during this time. Of course, Marble Canyon Lodge in 1929 gave them land right up close to the bridge. Glen Canyon National Recreation Area came online in 1958. That put land at the bridge. The Department of Transportation Act in 66, the National Historic Preservation Act in 66, the National Environmental Policy Act in 1970, the Endangered Species Act of 73, and then Grand Canyon National Parks Enlargement Act of 1975 all changed the Navajo Bridge. Now, in 75, if you dropped a stone off the bridge, I don't recommend you do that, but if you did, that stone would fall into Grand Canyon National Park. So anybody who was thinking about building another bridge was going to have to build a bridge over Grand Canyon National Park. I mean, just don't mess with Grand Canyon National Park. Just don't mess with it. The bridge was an attractive nuisance in itself. People would stop there and they'd jump out with their cameras and they'd be taking pictures. And the next car would become barreling along and there's this car over there. Gonna suffer out this stuff. And then there was this problem. 2 semis could pass each other, but both of them were going to lose their rear view mirrors. There's all this glass out there, you know, from that little endeavor. So ADOT knew they had to do something, and they knew they were in trouble whatever they did. So they hired this guy. You got to hire somebody, right? The guy sitting there in the brown suit is named Jerry Cannon. Jerry loves historical bridges, and ADOT knows this. It's in the, in the 80s, they're like, oh, okay, let's hire Jerry. Because Jerry has the ability to work with stakeholders. This is what Jerry is known for. Bingo, he is the man. The first thing Jerry does is talk with the Boataway Gap Chapter Grazing Committee. Jerry's pretty smart. He knows if I don't have the grazing committee support of the Navajo, this project is going nowhere. So he talks to him and says, well, you've got these options and we could do this and we could do that. What do you guys want? And that guy, Mr. Lane on the far right said, I want 3 bridges. I want this one over here so I can go collect wood. I want that one over there so I can visit my grandma. And I want a 3rd one just because the other 2 are going to need repairs every now and then. I'll need a 3rd bridge. But Jerry's a serious kind of guy. And he's like figuring out the money, how much it would cost. And he's like, Mr. Lane, it's going to cost an awful lot of money. And he just laughed and said, no, 1 bridge would be fine. Got the grazing committee on board. The next thing Jerry did was hire Pauline Wilson, a descendant of Chi Dodge, to be the interpreter for this project with Boataway Gap. I mean, Jerry is just brilliant. It took him 8 years. It took him and his team 8 years to get all the compliance approvals from Grand Canyon National Park, Glen Canyon National Recreation Area, Jane Foster over there, Marble Canyon Lodge. It just went on and on and on. Of course, on Navajo. I mean, just, oh my gosh, all the people involved, the Sierra Club. I mean, just a ton of people, and 14 million bucks.
This is for the second,
This is for the second bridge. Exactly right.
isn't in that chapter jurisdiction anymore, right?
Oh, yes, it is. The Navajo Nation still have the Flagstaff side of the land, and that's Boataway Gap chapter. Boom, right there. Yeah, yeah. The other thing that Jerry had was an engineer's vision of bridges. You know, bridge builders, when they get a chance to engineer a new bridge, can build what are called ego bridges with the state-of-the-art stuff with weird cables and tension concrete and blah, 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 blah. But Jerry knew that an engineer doing a new bridge has the ability to make the new bridge look like the old bridge, to honor the engineers who came before and their architectural concepts. And Jerry got what Ralph Hoffman back in the 20s saw: get rid of the junk overhead, make it so you can see what is happening. So Jerry came up with this second bridge design, looked like the first. It was 2.5 times wider, no more semi problems. It was heavier and stronger, that the steel was lighter weight, so it didn't weigh as much. And instead of using rivets, these, 600-degree pieces of the sun, that if you didn't catch right would hit you, do a 3rd-degree burn and bounce off. Just like that, boom, you got a 3rd-degree burn. Well, they got bolts, nuts and bolts now, okay? It's a technological advance. That's what they did with the second bridge. Here's the partnering agreement signed by all the contractors and subcontractors on the left. The main contractor was Kramer Brothers out of North America. Their subcontractor to build the bridge is Traylor Brothers. Traylor Brothers is awash in these bridge builders from the deep south that have this incredible accent. I can never understand what they're saying, but they're just so polite. And just so polite. And so what Traylor does is contact this guy, like me. He's tall and skinny. His name is Ed Kent. Smokes like a chimney, not like me. Ed was an apprentice. Didn't make it through high school. He and his brother got into ironworking on the bridge across the Americas at the Panama Canal using rivets in the 1950s. That's where he cut his teeth. By the time 93 rolled around, Ed Kent was a Superman amongst ironworkers. He was calm, cool, collected. He doesn't have a harness on right here as he walks across his beam. All right, he's got a net down below him there. But he had the ability to shake out the crew, to get rid of the dead weight, and the remaining people were hardworking and would complete the job ahead of schedule. Ed knew how to make a team work. There's Ed, who passed away soon after this job was completed. And his daughter sent me a picture of his headstone. It just says K-E-N-T. That's it. Ironworkers, when you drive on the highway, these people built your highway. Do you think about them? Do you know who they are? Zip, nada, nothing. I just find that amazing. 1927-28, all the rock went into the river. Any of you are river runners and been on the river, you might have noticed as you go under the bridge, there's a little riffle there. That's from all the rock that they dumped into the river, building the first bridge. No, that's Grand Canyon down there. You're going to yank all that stuff out. Well, not all of it. Some of it, with controlled blasting, went into the river. 16,000 cubic yards of rock for the foundation for the second bridge. Only 200 cubic yards of rock went into the river. So I got a little film. I get to sit down again.
Some areas on the cliff face were determined entirely impractical to contain or to stabilize. The upcoming blast sequence will remove an overhang of 16 feet at the top edge of the future skewback foundation. Permission from the Park Service was obtained prior to the design of the shop. Their direction was to put as much pulverized rock into the river as possible. As funny as that may sound, the idea was not to create a talus slope, nor to create a rapid as might happen with a concentrated rock fall into the river. By most accounts, the blast was a complete success. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
Perfect.
That was perfect. Yeah!
Well, that looked nice.
That was beautiful.
Look at that. Didn't even touch below very much. Let's zoom in.
Boy, they got that sucker off of there, didn't they?
That was perfect.
Damn, I owe somebody a lunch, don't I?
You owe me two. I want to keep that straight.
That's awesome. Full of water.
I'd like this on record.
Listen to the water.
Look at all the people out on the bridge already.
God, look at that water stirring.
Thanks, that guy.
Ooh-wee. White water in there.
The containment system that was to be employed to retain the rock excavation from the skewback construction was up to the contractor to design and construct. The system chosen was a flexible wire net system anchored with rock bolts and cables. The system was effective in its overall function, although two severe failures resulted in rock loss into the canyon. The success of the blasting and containment process relied on directing the blasting forces away from the canyon edge.
So that's how we did the second bridge rock removal. So drop this trapper down there and scoop all that stuff, bucket it out. Crazy stuff. So the first bridge construction, one iron worker fell. No net on he perished. Guy in the upper left is a bolt inspector, still alive today, lives in this town. It was a Saturday. No, all the iron workers were gone. They were off on the weekends. And he's in there inspecting their bolts, inspecting their work. He unclips, goes around a steel beam to clip on the other side. Next thing he knows, he's in the net looking up. This is a fascinating team of iron workers who put this bridge together. The crane worker, Andy McElroy, he's scared of heights. He's a crane operator. He's on the ground, right? The crane's up there. He's moving stuff here and there. Gets to his job site, gets out of his truck and goes, oh, but he did it. Guy on the far right, David Mesh, is a bolt up the bolt-up crew chief, Ed Kent's to the left of him. More than half of the rest of the ironworkers are Navajo. This is the difference in the second Navajo Bridge. The first group to be contacted was the grazing committee or the Bolloway Gap chapter. What was so cool about this and talking to these guys and getting their oral histories is the Southerners, had this terrible Southern language we couldn't understand, but the Navajo could talk Navajo and the Southerners didn't know what they were saying. So these guys got together, the Southerners and the Navajo, and they had an amazing time. This is the pinning, October 13th, 1994. The big orange ball is going up to Andy's crane. Well, who's doing this? What's going on? They're using that headache ball to drive the pin in. Guy in a white t-shirt is Mike Charlie. Louis Biguet is in the middle in a dark blue shirt, and David Mesh in the lower left. Ed Kent in the upper right. This is teamwork. These are ironworkers. This is an amazing story. The topping out ceremony, you see big skyscrapers go up. There are ceremonies that happen that the engineers don't know about, that the ironworkers do. The last piece of steel goes up. Nobody knows when that's going to happen except the ironworkers. Boom, it goes up. They put a flag on it. They have a topping out ceremony. There is the American flag and the Navajo Nation flag. September 14th, 1995, the dedication day for this bridge didn't have 6,000 to 8,000 people. There might have been 600 or so. Walking across the bridge with the American and the Navajo flag are indigenous servicemen. How cool is that? Two bridges named as one. The Navajo Bridge. Thanks to Rusty and Coconut Community College for this comment talk. There are some books here by Vishnu Temple Press. The proceeds of the book sales go to Northland Hospice. And if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them. No guarantees.
When they built the road from Cameron to the bridge, is that where the road is today, or is it?
Good question. When they built the road, when Eldridge Moore's,
Will you repeat his question so
I-
the folks online?
I am, thank you. When Eldridge Moore's went out to build the road, is the road he built the road we use today? Mostly, but not quite. When you make that drive, if you look around, you will see, especially if you go north of Moenkopi Wash, you'll see there's some old road there between there and the gap. And it's just a little off this way or it's a little off that way. But a ton of the road we travel today was Moore's Road. Good question.
How about that Dugway that they talked about in the film? Is that still there?
Your question is very interesting. It's about the Dugway. Is the Dugway still there? It's called the Emmett Dugway. And it is still there. And you can see it when you drive into Lee's Ferry today. If you look across the river, you can see it cutting down the hillside. It's a one-lane road, and basically you would drive down, and there was a bell, and you'd ring the bell on the Flagstaff side, and the ferryman lived on the Fredonia side, and they get the ferry and come over and get you. I don't know what happened when somebody was going to have to back up. That's all there was to it. When two vehicles met in the middle. Lots of history about why the last ferry failed. It was just after high water. High water stresses the ferry cable the most. The cable failed and 3 people drowned. That was in the same week that Lake McDaniels went off the bridge. Yeah.
Question from Zoom. Is the Navajo Bridge simply now considered part of the Grand Canyon National Park, or is it its own national monument?
Good question. Is the Navajo Bridge considered a part of Grand Canyon National Park, or is it its own monument? It's not a monument. The two bridges are both owned by ADOT, the Arizona Department of Transportation. One bridge is a walking bridge. The other bridge is a driving bridge. They span Grand Canyon National Park. The foundations of both bridges are on River left in the Navajo Nation and on River Right in Grand Canyon National Park. So it's complicated. It's a good question, but I hope that's your answer.
Thank you.
Just to ask where the men stayed when they're building this. There's not a whole lot of lodging or space out there. Do they camp? Did they?
Good question, where the men stayed when they built the bridge. Well, in 1928, they had a tent camp with a cook. Yeah, and that cook was Navajo. Ooh. Okay, 28. And then when they built the first half out, they cabled everybody, including the doctor and the nurse and the cook and everybody else, and the tents and everything else to the Fredonia side, built their camp out there, and then built that side out. In 93, some of the people had little camper vans and slept in there. Some people rented in Page and stayed there. Some stayed with family here and there. They also rented out some of the Marble Canyon apartments that were there. So that was in the 90s. No more questions. I guess I can go home. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight.